Chapter 1286. Long Fei Yi didn't know what to do. Mu Ling quickly rushed to Han Yunxi's other side to support her. Han Yunxi couldn't stop retching. She was disgusted, but she couldn't spit it out. Jin Zi, find a doctor. Long Fei Yi anxiously shouted. Jin Zi was also stunned. He didn't expect to find such a thing. The food he gave was absolutely carefully selected. There was no problem. What are you doing? Find a doctor. Long Fei Yi's gaze was enough to kill. Jin Zi didn't dare to delay and immediately went. Mu Ling anxiously asked, Sis, what's wrong with you? How about I help you vomit? It could be seen that she was either choking on the food or was disgusted but couldn't spit it out. This kind of neither up nor down state was the most uncomfortable. The best and fastest way was to vomit. Vomit everything out. Once it was unblocked and smooth, she would feel better. Han Yunxi was so disgusted that she couldn't answer Mu Ling. She just kept waving her hand, indicating that she didn't need it. Just like this, Long Fei Yi and Mu Ling watched Han Yunxi suffer, but couldn't help. Only when one was sick would they know how fortunate it was to have a doctor by their side. At this moment, the three of them must have thought of Gu Beiyue. After a while, Jin Zi dragged an old doctor over. Han Yunxi stopped vomiting. Her face was a bit pale as she leaned on the table. Her entire body didn't have much strength. Long Fei Yi and Mu Ling surrounded her, asking about her condition. When they saw the doctor come over, the two consciously moved aside. The old doctor didn't come over immediately. Instead, he tidied his hair and beard while complaining to Jin Zi, I already told you, don't look for old man if it's a small illness or pain. The old man is busy these days. Yuning City's big benefactor is a patient. Don't talk nonsense. Quickly go take a look. Jin Zi said coldly. Big benefactor. The old doctor didn't think that it would be the emperor and empress. He only thought that some important officials had come. He also looked over. Just by looking at Han Yunxi's expression, he knew that the patient was her. What are you talking about? Why aren't you coming over? Long Fei Yi bellowed. This old doctor was one of Ning Cheng's men. He was Ning Cheng's personal doctor in the army. He had followed Ning Cheng ever since Ning Cheng was Tianning's great general. His medical skills were excellent, but his temper wasn't very good. He only treated serious illnesses, not minor ailments, and never gave face to influential officials. He glanced at Long Fei Yi and went to check Han Yunxi's pulse without saying anything. After a while, he let go of her hand, stroked his beard, and asked slowly, What did you eat just now? Barbecue. Mu Ling quickly replied. Have you eaten anything else today? The doctor asked again. Long Fei Yi quickly told him what they had eaten in the morning and afternoon. He already had a son, but when he heard that Han Yunxi might be pregnant, he still felt the same as when he was about to be a father for the first time. Surprised, excited, surprised, and at a loss. He couldn't help but smile. It was faint, and he wasn't laughing out loud, but anyone could tell that he was very, very happy. He squatted down in front of Han Yunxi, took her hand, and whispered, Tell me, tell me. Han Yunxi was a little confused, and she didn't understand what he meant. This time, tell me personally, Long Fei Yi said again. The last time she was pregnant with Rue was already a few months old. Only then did he know that he was going to be a father. This time, he couldn't miss it. He wanted her to tell him personally, Han Yunxi understood. She was happy, touched, and worried at the same time. But, it's not confirmed yet. I can't read his pulse, she said. Long Fei Yi thought for a moment, and said seriously, then I'll wait. He got up and immediately summoned the shadow guard. Send a letter to Medical City and ask Gu Beiyue to come over as soon as possible. Han Yunxi didn't know what to say to him. She really didn't look forward to her second child. She wanted to take it slow. After all, Rui was still young, and she still had a lot to do. But seeing Long Feiyi like this, she suddenly looked forward to it. She really hoped that she was pregnant, and that she could look at him and share the good news with him personally. Long Feiyi didn't let Han Yunxi stay outside. He immediately brought Han Yunxi back to the tent to rest. Mu Ling followed and volunteered to take care of all 3 meals and supper. Long Feiyi's original plan was completely disrupted. He sent a few subordinates to find the secret passage with Jin Zi and wait for him. At the same time, he secretly handed over all the evidence in his hands to the Supreme Court official, letting him take charge of the case. Before Jin Zi set off, he specially went to the kitchen to take a look at Mu Ling. Unfortunately, Mu Ling was focused on cooking porridge and didn't know that he had come. Jin Zi left silently. It would take at least a month for him to return. He wasn't worried that Mu Ling would leave. Firstly, as long as the Empress didn't leave, this girl wouldn't leave. Secondly, he hadn't given her his gold card yet. Half a month later, the prairies had officially entered winter. The north wind was very strong and whistled all day long. Gu Beiyue arrived at the military camp alone. He had a gray fox fur coat over his snow-white robes and was carrying a medical case on his right shoulder. He stood at the entrance of the tent. Even though he was covered in dust, it couldn't hide the extraordinary handsomeness between his brows. No matter how restless the north wind was behind him, it couldn't blow away the gentleness and calmness in his eyes. He gave a faint smile. Emperor, Empress, please forgive this subordinate for being late. How could there be such a person? Even in the cold winter, as long as she saw him, the entire world would warm up. Han Yunxi smiled, not knowing how to answer him. Long Feiyi also gave a helpless smile. Gu Beiyue, your qigong has improved again. Long Feiyi had estimated that Gu Beiyue would arrive in 5 days, but who knew that he would arrive 5 days early? Emperor, it's good that Empress doesn't blame me. Gu Beiyue smiled and quickly came over. Empress, this subordinate will take your pulse. Han Yunxi quickly reached out her hand. Gu Beiyue was serious and professional. Long Feiyi stood to the side and waited. The large tent quieted down. In reality, in this half a month, Han Yunxi had more or less made her own judgment. Her good friend didn't come, so there was an 80 to 90% chance that she was pregnant. However, the pulse didn't appear, so she didn't dare to be completely sure. Long Feiyi didn't understand that much and she didn't explain too much to him. She just waited for Gu Beiyue to arrive. A long time passed, but Gu Beiyue still didn't seem to have found anything. Long Feiyi was already nervous, but he didn't dare to speak. Han Yunxi wasn't that nervous at first, but when she saw Long Feiyi's serious expression, she also became nervous. Finally, Gu Beiyue let go of Han Yunxi's hand. The moment he let go, Long Feiyi asked, "How is it?" Gu Beiyue smiled but didn't say anything. He stood up. "How is it?" Long Feiyi asked again. That anxious look was really unlike him. Gu Beiyue stood up and bowed respectfully. "Congratulations, Your Majesty. Empress is indeed pregnant." Long Feiyi was overjoyed. He looked at Han Yunxi and was about to speak when Han Yunxi covered his mouth and said, "Long Feiyi, I'm pregnant." They had agreed that she would tell him this personally. "Long Feiyi, I'm pregnant." She was the only one in the world who could say this, so of course she had to say it. "Long Feiyi, I'm pregnant." Han Yunxi repeated. Long Feiyi was so happy that he couldn't speak. Gu Beiyue smiled silently at the side. That joy came from the bottom of his heart. Suddenly, there was a loud bang. Everyone turned around and saw Mu Linger standing at the door. The porridge in her hand had been smashed to the ground. Before anyone knew what had happened to her, she ran towards Han Yunxi and shouted in surprise, "Sis! You're really pregnant. That's great. I want to go back with you. I want to take care of you." Chapter 1287. Mu Ling was very persistent. No matter how Han Yunxi tried to persuade her, she insisted that they return to Yuning to learn cooking from Granny Zhao and take care of Han Yunxi. She actually forgot all about her debts and the fact that she had to plant medicinal herbs in the snowy mountains. Han Yunxi had no choice but to ask shopkeeper Luo to press for Mu Ling's debts in private. She also disabled the gold card and made it useless. Only then did Mu Ling give up and obediently stay in the barracks to wait for Jin Zi to come back and deal with the debt. Before leaving, Han Yunxi left Mu Ling with a sentence. She said, "Ling you're not young anymore. You should live for yourself." Han Yunxi left him with these words before leaving. Mu Ling stood in a daze for a long time in the howling north wind. When she was young, she lived for her father's orders and for the glory of the Mu family. In those years, she chased after Qi brother everywhere. She had been busy with all kinds of matters in Medicine City. If any of her friends were in trouble, she would be the first to help. Live for herself. She had never thought about this question. Now that Han Yunxi had explained it to her, she didn't really understand. However, she didn't know why, but she felt as if a certain part of her heart was being pulled. It didn't hurt, but it was uncomfortable and blocked. She stood there for a long time before returning to the barracks. Just as she was about to enter, she suddenly heard someone call her from behind. "Mu Ling She turned around and saw Jin Zi riding on a horse. His face was covered in dust, and his clothes and hair were messed up by the strong wind. The sky was dark and the north wind was rampant. The entire grassland was dark and gloomy. Jin Zi's black clothes almost merged with the dark sky. Mu Ling felt like she was dreaming. It was a dream about the edge of the world and the end of time. It must be a dream. Jin Zi was far away at the western border. How could he be here? She hadn't dreamed of anyone for a long time. Her dreams were always empty. Why did this annoying fellow barge in? She clearly wanted to dream of her big brother Shao Qi. Not only did he disturb her in real life, he even dared to intrude into her dreams like a haunting ghost. He was really very annoying. Mu Linger ignored him and turned around. As soon as they entered the tent, the whole world suddenly became bright and warm. Mu Linger also became much more awake. She thought that she must have been hallucinating. But who knew that just as she sat down, Jin Zi walked in. Mu Linger was stunned. Only then did she completely sober up. She blurted out, Why are you back? He should have just arrived at the border." Jin Zi came back halfway because he suddenly realized that if Han Yunxi was really pregnant, he would not stay in Long Feiyi for long. The winter in Northernly was not easy. With Mu Ling's personality, she would definitely follow him back. Therefore, he gave the map to Su Donglin and returned. "You are still not leaving?" Jin Zi asked in return. Mu Linger did not understand for a moment. Jin Zi added, "Your sister has already left. Why are you still here?" Mu Linger was originally feeling a little down. But after Jin Zi asked this question, her anger surged. She said coldly, "You haven't returned my gold card. How am I going to leave? Do you think I'm willing to stay here? Let me tell you, Qinquan Bank has already come to collect the debt from me. Do as you see fit. Someone will return the gold card to you in a few days. Someone will also arrange for the debt to be paid at the end of the month. I will also help you pay the interest from Kangon Bank. As Jinzi said this, he purposely opened the door and opened it. You can leave now. Mu Linger felt stifled. She did not know what to say. She wanted to leave immediately, but she thought for a long time before she remembered about the snow mountain. Yes, she still had to go up the snow mountain to plant herbs. Her sister did not want her to take care of her, so of course she had to quickly plant the herbs. She could either buy them from the black market or use them as collateral for Kangon Bank. If not for this, even if her sister did not want her to take care of her, she would have left long ago and returned to Medicine City. Mu Linger explained herself in her heart. She felt a little more confident and asked in return, why did you come back? I forgot to take something, Jinzi said coldly. Oh. Mu Linger answered loudly. Then, the two of them fell silent again. Jinzi hardened his heart and asked again, You're still not leaving? He really did not expect her to stay. He wanted to ask her why, like a madman, but if he asked, it would sound like he was chasing her away. You're still not leaving. I. Mu Linger hesitated. Jinzi unconsciously furrowed his brows, waiting for her answer. Unfortunately, Mu Linger did not give him an answer, but a goodbye. She said, Who said I'm not leaving? I just forgot to take something. I'm leaving now. Goodbye. Of course, she would leave the army camp, but she would not leave Northernly. She left after saying that, striding past Jinzi and out the door. Jinzi was stunned. He stood there, motionless. The tent was brightly lit and the stove was warm, but his body was gradually becoming colder. He had rushed back day and night, riding a horse at full speed. He allowed the wind to pour into his clothes and into his body. It was so cold that he lost all feeling in his body. But that was not as cold as the coldness he felt at this moment. After a long time, he turned his head and saw the vast grassland outside the door. It was gloomy and bleak, without any light or end in sight. He began to think about Mu Linger's question. Why did he come back? To keep her. But, he clearly did not. A year had already passed. What did he want to do by forcing her to come here? He clearly knew that she hated him. He clearly knew that he would not force her to marry him. If he wanted to, he would have done so a year ago. Now that he had forced her to come here, what could he do? Jinzi took out the gold card and looked at it silently. Actually, he had always carried this gold card with him. He could return it to her at any time. He looked at it for a long time before handing the gold card to the servant. He said calmly, Go to the bank and pay off all the money in this card. Yes. The servant asked, Master, then this card, you don't want it anymore? Jinzi stared at the servant and did not answer for a long time. The servant felt his hair stand on end. He did not know whether to say or not. He was so scared that his legs turned to jelly. In the end, Jinzi did not say whether he wanted the card or not. He just turned and left. The servant looked at the gold card in his hand with a confused expression. Lord Jin's thoughts were the most difficult to guess. What should he do? Jinzi rushed to the border that day and did not ask about Mu Linger's whereabouts. A few days later, the servant went to the underground bank and transferred a sum of money to Heaven and Earth Bank. Heaven and Earth Bank lifted the ban on the gold card. The servant brought it back, but didn't know what to do with it. After struggling for 3 days and 3 nights, he finally secretly put the gold card under Lord Jin's pillow. Half a month later, Han Yunxi and Long Feiyi returned to Yuning Palace. Gu Beiwei also brought Ruier back from Medical City. Han Yunxi began her happy days of nurturing her baby. However, Ruier had no choice but to sleep in separate beds from them. After all, Ruier slept in a different bed. It would be a big problem if he kicked his mother's belly. At first, Ruier wasn't happy and made a fuss for 2 nights. Later on, Ruier stopped making a fuss. Every night, when the Grand Tutor wanted to leave the palace, he would follow and stay in the Grand Tutor's residence at night. Gu Beiyue did not return to Medical City, so the matter at Medical City was delayed. Mu Linger did not return to Medicine City, so the matter at Medicine City was also delayed. The matters at Medical City and Medicine City were not urgent. After all, Long Feiyi had to fill the national treasury first before he could touch Medical City and Medicine City. Mu Linger did not return to Medicine City. Since Lil Thing had nothing to do, it ran back to Yuning City. Once it came back, Ruier would have company and would not return to the palace with Grand Tutor Gu. He forced his imperial father and imperial mother to come to the Grand Tutor's residence to accompany him several times. Ruier was actually just throwing a tantrum. As long as his imperial father and imperial mother came, he would be overjoyed and would definitely return to the palace with them that night. He also did not want his imperial mother to sleep with him. Instead, he relied on his imperial father. In the end, Long Feiyi had no choice but to put 2 beds in the palace. Because of Ruier and Lil Thing, the originally quiet Grand Tutor's residence became lively. The livelier it was, the more Han Yunxi missed Qin Min. She was also more curious about what had happened between Qin Min and Gu Beiyue. She and Long Feiyi only knew that Qin Min was most likely faking her pregnancy. However, they really could not guess the truth between Qin Min and Gu Beiyue. Han Yunxi wanted to ask him about Qin Min multiple times, but she held back the words as they reached her lips. After all, Gu Beiyue's attitude in Ningzhou City made it difficult for her to ask too many questions. After all, that was Gu Beiyue's family matter. A month later, Jin Zi, Su Donglin, and the people sent by the Supreme Court found out about the illegal salt. They arrested the people who were escorting the salt at the secret passage between Northernly and Wintercrow. At the same time, they found some evidence of the 3 great clans colluding with Wintercrow's human trafficker Lu Jing. The 3 great clans had indeed colluded with Lu Jing to occupy the secret passage and smuggle other goods to the mysterious continent. However, they had not acted on it yet. Long Feiyi did not personally appear in the trial, nor did he expose East Origin Palace. He let the Supreme Court Chancellor preside over the case. After a month of trial, the Chancellor convicted shopkeeper Chow and many people from the 3 great clans. At the same time, he also arrested a large number of officials. Because the 3 great clans' patriarchs were not directly involved in the case, they were not convicted and could only be considered as being implicated. However, Long Feiyi used this case to eliminate many of the 3 great clans' influence in the Great Qin's officialdom. At the same time, he took back the Changning salt pans and took the opportunity to take over the other salt pans. It could be said that this case completely reversed the situation in Jiangnan. From then on, there were no more wealthy clans in Jiangnan that could rival a nation. It was also from this year that the Great Qin's treasury became more and more abundant. It was worth mentioning that the Supreme Court Chancellor did not know where the evidence given to him by the Emperor came from. A few vice-chancellors personally interrogated shopkeeper Chow to find out who he was transporting the salt to. In the end, shopkeeper Chow did not reveal the young lord of East Origin Palace. He knew that the death penalty was unavoidable. Before he died, he still hoped that the young lord of East Origin Palace would treat his family and clansmen well. As for the 3 young masters, they did not dare to confess. Because once they did, the 3 great clans would be punished even more severely. The buyer of the salt became the final mystery. Long Feiyi and Han Yunxi would probably never reveal the truth in this lifetime. Because of this, only Han Yunxi knew that the young lord of East Origin Palace had a homosexual fetish. After the case was over, Jin Zi was exhausted. He returned to the army camp and fell asleep on his pillow. Tomorrow, Linger's story would be opened. Chapter 1288. Jin Zi returned to his tent from the border and fell asleep as soon as he hit the bed. The smuggling case had nothing to do with him at all. He didn't know what had gone wrong with his head, but he'd risked his life to help Su Donglin and the justice courts capture the culprit. Unfortunately, he hadn't gotten any information on Ningqing this time. He wanted nothing more than to rush to Lu Zheng's lair and arrest him for interrogation. Unfortunately, violence wasn't his strong suit. He'd urged Su Donglin to capture the culprit multiple times, but Su Donglin didn't dare to act rashly despite his intentions. Lu Zheng was from Winter Crow country, so it was legal to sell slaves there and on the mysterious continent. Thus, Great Qin couldn't convict him of any crime. As for Lu Zheng's collusion with the three great clans of Jiangnan, there was evidence, but Winter Crow country refused to hand over the culprit. Great Qin's laws couldn't punish them either. The imperial court could only ban Lu Zheng and the others from entering the Great Qin Empire. Once they stepped into the Great Qin Empire, they would be killed without mercy. Actually, Long Fei Yi didn't care about Winter Crow country at all. He once considered using this as an excuse to send troops to Winter Crow country and annex it. But in the end, Han Yunxi stopped him from doing so. For one thing, sending troops to Winter Crow country would only leave them with rumors of the strong bullying the weak. For another, Lu Zheng's background was complicated. His businesses had many connections with the mysterious continent, so it wouldn't be worth it if conflict broke out between Cloud Realm and the mysterious continent because of this. Chu Shifeng was left behind at Winter Crow country to investigate Jin Zi's origins and Ning Chang's whereabouts. His colleagues were also investigating Lu Zheng's business dealings with the mysterious continent, as well as his own family's power. Jin Zi only wanted Ning Chang's whereabouts, so he could only wait. Jin Zi laid on the pillow and slept for 1 day and 2 nights. God knows how tired he was. On the morning of the 3rd day, he raised his head in a daze. His short hair was messy like a bird's nest, and his bangs were all sticking up. His pair of cold eyes were completely exposed. It had to be said that his eyes were really, really beautiful, especially when he looked sleepy and confused at this time. He didn't have the usual coldness, but had the cuteness of a big brother next door. He reached out to rub his messy hair and lay back on the pillow lazily. He had been busy for so long, and now that he woke up after a good night's sleep, he suddenly didn't need to be busy anymore. He was a little unused to it. He stared blankly at the empty tent. No one knew what he was thinking, but his eyes suddenly became sluggish, as if he had lost his soul. After a long time, he finally came back to his senses. He rubbed his hair with all his might, messing it up completely. He got up. His movement was not small, and the pillow was thrown to the ground. He was about to lie down to pick it up when he caught a glimpse of a gold card lying quietly on the bed. It's him. Her gold card. All of Cloud Realm Continent's gold cards had the same front, but the back was different. The gold card in front of him was facing up, but he recognized it at first glance. After all, he had hidden it in his robes for a year. He picked it up and flipped it to the back, only to see that it was right. He looked and thought. Suddenly, he threw the gold card out and it hit the pillar in the middle of the tent. He got off the bed, tidied himself up, and left the house. He didn't know where he went, but after a busy day, it was already the middle of the night by the time he returned. The tent was so big, but the gold card was so small. Still, he saw it as soon as he entered the tent. "Someone come," he said coldly. A servant immediately entered. "Your Excellency Jean, what orders do you have?" Have you paid off all the debts this excellency owes? Jean Z asked icily. All paid off, the servant replied honestly. And the interest? Jean Z asked next. All paid off as well, the servant replied. Jean Z stared at the card on the pillar and asked again, and the card? Did you return it too? The servant didn't see the card hit the pillar, but he was alarmed. So his master wanted to return the card to Miss Ling. Your servant put the card under your excellency Jin's pillow. Your servant will go get it right away, the servant said anxiously. Jean Z said expressionlessly. The servant hurried to the bed, but couldn't find the card even after searching under the pillow for a while. He picked up the pillow, only to see that it was empty. What? The servant was frightened. When your excellency Jean wasn't here, he'd come every day to clean the tent and make the bed once every 2 or 3 days. Yesterday, when he came to change out the blankets, he even took a look and saw that the card was still lying under the pillow. How come today? Frightened, the servant began to search all over the bed, but he couldn't find a trace of the card even after lifting the covers. Your excellency Jean, did you? He wanted to ask, but swallowed the words back in the end. If your excellency Jean saw the card again, he would have returned it long ago. Why would he ask so many questions? He thought that your excellency Jean must have asked because he didn't see it. Your excellency Jean, your servant really put the card under the pillow, but now, the servant was so anxious that he was about to cry. But now, it's gone. Gone. Jean Z looked at him coldly. Please spare my life, your excellency Jean. Your servant definitely didn't embezzle the card. Even if I had a huge order, I wouldn't dare to do so. Please understand, your excellency Jean. The servant knelt down and begged. Jean Z was still expressionless as he said coldly, if it's gone, then so be it. Go and tell Mu Ling, to go to Kangon Bank and get her banned from using the card. This matter ends here. The servant was very surprised. He didn't expect that your excellency Jean didn't blame him for such a huge matter. Yes. Just as the servant was about to run out, Jean Z added, you better find Mu Ling, as soon as possible and ban that card. Otherwise, if it's misused, all the debts will be on your head. The servant was so frightened that his heart almost jumped out of his chest. He turned around and ran, immediately using all the resources at his disposal to find Mu Ling. That night, 4 letters were sent by Eagle, 1 to Medical City, Medicine City, Yuning City, and Pill Fiend Pharmacy. After the servant left, Jean Z glanced up at the gold card hanging from the pillar and went to sleep. Several days later, the servant still hadn't received any news from Mu Ling. He knelt by the pillar with tears and snot running down his face, begging Jean Z for advice. Your excellency Jean, you will definitely find Miss Ling. Please have mercy, your excellency Jean. Your excellency Jean, Miss Ling, isn't in Medical City, Medicine City, or Yuning City. She's not in Pill Fiend Pharmacy either. Your excellency Jean, please give this humble one some directions. Jean Z murmured, she hasn't returned to Medicine City. The servant shook his head. This humble one has asked the Mu clan twice. They all said that Miss Ling, hasn't returned since she went north last time. Jean Z suddenly frowned. The servant hurriedly continued, Medical City asked Vice Academy Head Shin, and Yuning City asked Grand Tutor Gu. They all said that they haven't seen her. Before Jean Z could say anything, the servant hurriedly added, this humble one will go ask the people in Medicine Ghost Valley. However, 2 days later, the steward of Medicine Ghost Valley replied, saying that Mu Ling hadn't been to Medicine Ghost Valley for more than 2 years. That night, Jean Z couldn't sleep. The next day, he received a handwritten letter from Han Yunxi, questioning him about Mu Ling's whereabouts. Han Yunxi had always thought that Mu Ling was staying in the northerly barracks, waiting for Jin Zi to return so that they could plant medicine in the snowy mountains together. After reading the letter, Jin Zi came to a realization and immediately rushed out of the tent. At this time, the sky was dark and gloomy, and the entire grassland was covered in heavy snow. Jin Zi looked into the distance, but he couldn't see the snowy mountains in the distance. Jin Zi angrily kicked a stone at his feet and angrily said, "Mu Ling, how stupid can you be?" The snowy mountains in the northern part of Northernly were continuous, each taller and steeper than the last. Many of them had yet to be climbed, so they were revered as sacred mountains by the local herdsmen. In the northern part of Northernly, there were many activities to worship the mountain gods and snow gods every winter. Only a few of these snowy mountains were suitable for growing medicinal herbs, while many of them hid many precious wild medicinal herbs that had yet to be excavated. In the past, Juni Xia had developed 3 snowy mountains to grow medicinal herbs, all of which were in the northwestern part of Northernly, bordering Winter Crow. The mountains weren't steep, but they were very high. The mountainside was covered in snow all year round, so it wasn't easy to climb up or down the mountain. According to Jin Zi's understanding, the medicinal herbs that Juni Xia and the Mu clan had jointly planted were very rare and very special. They could only survive in the snow. In other words, those medicinal herbs were distributed on the mountainside of the snowy mountains. It was soon going to be the coldest time in Northernly. In a few days, there would be several days of heavy snow. When that time came, not to mention going up and down the snowy mountains, even going out would be difficult. Although those 3 snowy mountains had been opened up by Juni Xia, it was still very dangerous for Mu Ling to go alone. Not to mention that the mountain roads were difficult to traverse, just the wolves and snow leopards on the mountain were impossible to guard against. Those ferocious beasts couldn't find any prey in the cold weather, so once they saw a person, they would all pounce over to fight for food. It would be strange if Mu Ling didn't get torn apart. The more Jin Zi thought about it, the uglier his face became. He suddenly blew a sharp whistle to summon the big white tiger. But who would have thought that the big white tiger that would usually rush over when he gave the order actually didn't appear? Jin Zi blew again, but the big white tiger still didn't appear. He was shocked and personally ran to the tiger camp near his tent. He saw that the tent that he had specially prepared for the big white tiger was empty, with nothing inside. "Where's the tiger?" he coldly questioned. "I haven't seen it for several days. It should be in the mountains," the guard timidly replied. Big White was the leader of the tiger troops. The tiger troops were all hidden in the nearby hills, and only Big White lived in the military camp. Usually, Big White would run into the mountains and forests, so it was normal for it to not return for an entire month. Apart from Lord Jean, no one else in the army dared to approach Big White, nor did they dare to care about its whereabouts. They were only responsible for delivering roasted meat to Big White every day. Faced with the angry and anxious Lord Jean, the guard was very confused. A complicated look flashed across Jin Zi's eyes. Coldly, he said, "I'll be away for a while, so I'll leave the military matters to the deputy generals." After giving his instructions, Jin Zi went into the mountains. After asking around, he found out that Big White wasn't in the forest. That day, he brought 10 white tigers and went straight to the snowy mountain herb fields. In the early winter of the next year, they would grow into a snow jade cordyceps that was both a plant and an animal. How did the jade butterfly cub and the snow ginseng grow together? No one knew the reason behind this. However, it took the Mu family and Jun Xia 3 years to figure out where the snow jade cordyceps came from. Jun Xia died, and the Mu family was defeated. This secret fell into the hands of Mu Ling. In order to obtain more snow jade cordyceps, June Xia and the Mu family cultivated the snowy mountain herb field. In the winter, they artificially planted large amounts of snow ginseng for the jade butterflies to lay eggs. They even began to research how to attract more jade butterflies to the herb field, as well as how to raise them. However, before they could even try, the cooperation was broken. Mu Ling also wanted to see what the jade butterflies looked like. It would be best if she could catch a few and raise them. Thus, with Dabai's protection, she resolutely decided to take the risk and climb the snowy mountain. The jade butterflies would only appear for a few days in the early spring. At that time, the snow would melt, so it was impossible to climb the mountain. Thus, if she wanted to see the jade butterflies, she could only spend the winter on the snowy mountain and wait until spring. In fact, Mu Ling was not impulsive. After all, the Mu family and June Xia had cooperated before. She also understood the situation on the snowy mountain herb field. Not only did she bring Dabai, but she also brought a lot of food and daily necessities. The tall Dabai seemed to have become her horse. Not only did he have to carry her, but he also had to help her carry a lot of things. Mu Ling brought a lot of food, a large bedding, several sets of clothes, boots, and even cooking pots and pans. One could imagine how much work Dabai had to do. However, Dabai was very willing. He was especially happy along the way. When they encountered some small beasts, he also turned a blind eye and let them go. There were several abandoned stone houses beside the herb field. Mu Ling found the warmest one and tidied it up. Then, she and Dabai stayed there. Mu Ling stayed for a night before she realized that she had forgotten to bring charcoal. She was so cold that she almost fell sick. Fortunately, she had the habit of carrying medicinal pills with her. She was fine after taking a few pills. She looked around and actually found a large pile of charcoal and firewood in the most remote stone house. There were also many daily necessities. These were probably left behind by the previous herb farmers. The charcoal was used for warmth and the firewood was used for cooking. Just like that, Mu Ling stayed in the snow mountain herb field. After a few days of acclimatization, she dug up a few snow ginseng to study. She even dug up a snow jade cordyceps that hadn't been picked yet. Mu Ling was overjoyed. She yelled in the snow, "Dabai! Dabai, come and see." Dabai lay beside her. He looked lazy and adorable, but in reality, he maintained a high level of vigilance. He knew that there were many wolves, tigers, and leopards on this snow mountain. He originally wanted to follow Miss Ling and find out where she went before telling his master. However, who knew that Miss Ling would treat him as a horse and bring him up the snow mountain? Miss Ling was the girl that his master risked his life to save. His master must like her very, very much. Thus, he had to protect Miss Ling, no matter what. Dabai hurriedly stood up and shook off the snow on his body. He ran over excitedly. Mu Ling placed the small snow jade cordyceps in her palm for him to see. "Look, I found a treasure. This is good stuff." Dabai didn't know what Miss Ling was doing here, nor did he know how precious this small cordyceps was. However, he knew that Miss Ling was very happy. He rubbed his nose against Mu Ling's hand in response. "Here you go. Thank you for your hard work," Mu Ling said earnestly. Dabai glanced at the cordyceps. He didn't seem to be very interested. Mu Ling brought the cordyceps to his mouth. Only then did he use his tongue to roll the small cordyceps into his mouth. He swallowed it without even chewing. After June Xia's partnership with the Mu family was terminated, the cordyceps that were cultivated and wild were all gone. This was because no medicine farmers dared to go up the snow mountain again. If Mu Ling were to buy these cordyceps on the black market, they would definitely be sold for an extremely high price. Even if she didn't buy them, she could still eat them herself. However, she rewarded Dabai just like that, and the silly Dabai simply ate them. When she started, Dabai was also happy. It had nothing to do with value or utility. It was just that simple and pure. There was no need to explain it to outsiders. A few days later, it began to snow heavily. Mu Ling and Dabai hid in the stone house and didn't go out. Mu Ling knew that Dabai was a carnivore, so she specially prepared some cured meat. She clamped a metal rack over the stove and hung the cured meat on top of it to roast. After a while, the cured meat sizzled with oil and exuded an extremely alluring aroma. Dabai wanted nothing more than to pounce on the cured meat and gobble it up. However, he resisted the urge and patiently waited for Miss Ling to finish roasting the cured meat. Mu Ling asked as she roasted the cured meat, "Does that baddie roast meat for you often?" Dabai's mind was completely focused on the cured meat. He didn't understand what she was saying, so he just nodded. "That baddie also likes to eat meat, right?" Mu Ling asked again. Dabai continued to nod. "That baddie is really baddie. I curse him to stuff a piece of meat between his teeth every time he eats." After all, she had been tricked by her sister a few times, so she was experienced. However, who would have thought that the woman would leap lightly onto a large rock and leave behind a threat? "Okay, you'll be responsible for your own life and death." Based on this woman's skills, she could probably leave her in the dust. Mu Linger was a little confused, but she quickly asked, "How do we fight?" "Based on our own abilities," the woman said as she pulled out a dagger. A sly look flashed across Mu Linger's eyes as she continued, "You'll be responsible for your own life and death. Your beast is not allowed to seek revenge. You're dead meat," the woman said coldly. "Life and death are one thing, rules are another. Let's talk about the rules first, shall we?" Mu Linger said seriously. "Don't worry, if I really lose to you, I guarantee that they will all retreat. If you die by my hands, even if that tiger of yours doesn't seek revenge, I will find trouble with it." The woman's tone was extremely arrogant. Mu Linger sucked in a breath of cold air, her anger finally burning. She didn't waste any more words as she pulled out a dagger and pointed it at the woman. "Come." Seeing this, the big white tiger growled at Mu Ling. Mu Linger touched the big white tiger's mouth and whispered, "It's fine, don't worry." The woman walked over step by step, and the surrounding snow wolves and wild wolves consciously retreated to the side. Both Mu Linger and the woman were holding daggers. Although Mu Linger only knew a little bit of martial arts, she wasn't afraid. This was because this competition was based on each person's abilities and there were no restrictions. Therefore, she didn't want to fight this woman at all. Soon, the two stood face to face, only a step away from each other. Looking at her from such a close distance, Mu Linger was even more stunned. This woman was really beautiful. "Begin." The woman suddenly shouted and stabbed her dagger. Mu Linger retreated and casually scattered a large amount of powder at the same time. The woman didn't expect this and hurriedly wiped the powder off her face. "What is this?" Mu Linger stared blankly at her without a word. What else could this powder be but poison? Her big sister was the most poisonous woman in Cloud Realm continent, so how could she not have some skills as her little sister? After leaving Tiger's prison in the past, she and her big sister had brought plenty of poisons with them. The woman wiped her face clean and was about to attack again when her face and hands began to itch unbearably. She had no choice but to toss her dagger aside and scratch herself instead. You poisoned me. Slut, you're despicable. The woman cursed. We've already agreed that we'll rely on our own abilities, Mu-Linger retorted immediately. You. The woman clearly didn't expect Mu-Linger to have poisons. She quibbled, when this young lady said we'll rely on our own abilities, I meant martial arts, not these kinds of despicable methods. Your martial arts are clearly better than mine, so don't you think you're despicable? You clearly have more beasts than me, so don't you think you're despicable? Mu-Linger retorted angrily. You. The woman was easily irritated. Give me the antidote or else I'll have them bite you to death. If you lose, you have to apologize to me first. Mu-Linger said seriously. Don't even think about it. The woman roared back. Are you going to act shamelessly? If you can't afford to lose, then don't play. Mu-Linger was even more incensed now. But the woman was actually shameless enough to shout back, so what if this young lady acts shamelessly? Give me the antidote right now and apologize, then scram. Otherwise, I'll make sure your corpse doesn't even exist. Mu-Linger was so angry that she felt unwell. She didn't know how to reason with the woman, so she simply shouted back, No. Not giving. Not giving. Not giving. The woman suddenly swiped at her with her claws. Mu-Linger tried to dodge as she tried to use her poison. However, the woman's movements were too quick. Her other hand grabbed onto Mu-Linger's hand, and she yanked violently, almost dislocating Mu-Linger's wrist. Mu-Linger was in great pain and couldn't dodge in time. The woman's other hand viciously clawed at Mu-Linger's face, leaving behind 2 scars. Mu-Linger was dumbfounded. Right at this moment, Dabai suddenly pounced at her at lightning speed. He was so fast that not only was the woman unable to react in time, but the surrounding beasts were also caught off guard. Dabai directly pushed the woman to the ground. He pressed one paw against her body and raised his other paw high up in the air. Just as he was about to swipe at her face, the surrounding beasts all pounced toward Mu-Linger. Leopards were far faster than all other beasts. Dabai retreated without hesitation and quickly lifted Mu-Linger into the air. The 2 leopards missed their target. Dabai was filled with killing intent. He wanted to bite the 2 leopards to death, but he suppressed his urge. He flew up and caught Mu-Linger, allowing Mu-Linger to land on his back. Then, he landed on the ground. The woman had already crawled up. Her face was pale from fright. She scratched her face as she pointed at Dabai and Mu-Linger. All of you, attack. Tear them apart. She roared. In an instant, over 150 beasts swarmed toward them. Dabai and Mu-Linger were instantly drowned out by the sea of beasts. The leopards were extremely fast, while the wolves were extremely organized. What was even more frightening was that the woman was still giving out orders. She was speaking a strange language. Mu-Linger couldn't understand a word she was saying, but Dabai understood everything. Mu-Linger was extremely shocked. Could it be that this woman was also from the Black Tribe? Could it be that she also understood the language of beasts? Dabai was also puzzled. Was this woman from the same tribe as Master? However, he had no time to think about this. He had to protect Miss Linger. The 50 leopards all pounced at the white tiger's back, aiming for Mu-Linger. Meanwhile, the 100 or so wolves split into 4 groups to target the white tiger's 4 legs. The white tiger was truly fighting 1 against 100. No matter how ferocious Dabai was, he was still outnumbered. He would be drowned by these beasts. Dabai carried Mu-Linger on his back. Dabai dodged the attacks of the snow leopards and wolves at lightning speed. At the same time, he pounced on the snow leopards that were attacking Mu-Linger. However, all the wolves that managed to bite Dubai died on the spot. This was because Dubai was the leader of the poison corpses that Junisia had raised. His entire body was filled with poison. Even his blood was extremely poisonous. The snow leopard's target was Mulinger. They pounced toward her from all directions. Mulinger was scared out of her wits. However, at this moment, she was brave. She gripped her dagger tightly and guarded against the snow leopards that could pounce at any moment. Suddenly, 3 snow leopards pounced toward her from the right. Dubai immediately dodged and pounced toward the 3 snow leopards. At the same time, another 5 snow leopards pounced toward Mulinger. Dubai leaped high into the air and dodged. However, the snow leopard stepped on the wolves and leaped into the air. They pounced toward Mulinger from above. Mulinger was so scared that tears flowed out of her eyes. She clenched her teeth tightly and held the dagger with both hands, stabbing it into the air. Dubai couldn't care less about the wolves that were attacking him. After he landed, he immediately pounced to the side. Almost at the same time, the snow leopards pounced on the ground. Attack together! The woman roared from the side. Her face was already red from her scratches, but she didn't care anymore. In an instant, the group of wolves formed a circle. The snow leopards also formed a circle. Under the woman's command, the circle of snow leopards attacked at the same time. They all stepped on the backs of the wolves and leaped into the air before pouncing down. Dozens of snow leopards pounced down, leaving Dubai and Mulinger with nowhere to run. Dubai had just dodged one snow leopard when another one pounced on him. He hurriedly dodged the other snow leopard, but the other snow leopard pounced on him again. A few snow leopards scratched the back of Dubai, leaving bloody marks. They were so close to catching Mulinger. Although many snow leopards were poisoned to death, there were too many of them. In addition, the wolves had also started to imitate the snow leopards. This forced Dubai, who was riddled with injuries, to have no way to escape. Mulinger's position behind Dubai was getting smaller and smaller. Once she came into contact with Dubai's blood, she would also be poisoned to death. Just as 5 to 6 snow leopards pounced on him at the same time, Dubai suddenly flipped over and threw Mulinger onto the ground. At the same time, he pounced over and covered Mulinger in his arms, protecting her tightly. "I'm a pharmacist, I can help you grow more snow jade cordyceps," Mulinger said coldly. This was the best bargaining chip that she had come up with in a hurry. Hearing this, the woman was even happier. She laughed loudly. "I see. All right, I can let you live, but you still have to apologize to me and say that the herb field belongs to me." Mulinger clenched her fists. She was so angry that her lungs were about to explode. She would rather give up her life than bow down to this woman. However, she couldn't bear to part with Dubai. She still bowed down in the end. She lowered her head and muttered, "I'm sorry, the herb field is yours." The woman looked on with interest and was still dissatisfied. "What did you say? Come over and say it louder. You have to apologize properly. Didn't your parents teach you?" Mulinger lowered her head and walked over. She said mildly, "I'm sorry, the herb field is yours." However, the woman suddenly grabbed her by the hair and forced her to look up. "What's with that attitude? Look at me and say it." "Howl!" Dubai roared. It didn't have its usual aura. It was clearly angry, but it sounded like it was crying. Mulinger hurriedly waved her hands at Dubai, telling him not to move. The woman glanced at Dubai and snorted disdainfully. "So what if you can rear a tiger? You're still defeated by me, aren't you?" "Ha, repeat what you just said." I'm sorry, the herb field is yours, Mu Linger said loudly. She comforted herself. This wasn't humiliation, she was saving to buy. The woman tightened her grip and almost tore off Mu Linger's hair. She said, I said that you poisoned me. That's despicable. I poisoned you. That's despicable. Mu Linger yelled. The woman was finally satisfied. I thought you had some backbone. Turns out you're just a coward. What a bitch. Mu Linger's eyes reddened, but she didn't try to defend herself. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she stubbornly refused to let them fall. Unexpectedly, the woman went even further. How about this? Say that you're a bitch, and I'll forgive you. Mu Linger immediately glared at her. The woman didn't seem to care. You don't have to say it. I'm not forcing you. Mu Linger stared at the woman. She bit her lip so hard that it was about to bleed. It looks like you don't want to be forgiven. Fine, I won't forgive you. The woman waved her hand, and the surrounding ferocious beasts closed in again. I'll talk. Mu Linger choked up. I'm, the woman waited patiently. Who knew that just as Mu Linger was about to continue speaking, the big white tiger suddenly howled. The surrounding ferocious beasts seemed to have sensed something, and they all looked around in fear. The woman quickly noticed the strange behavior of the group of beasts. She also looked around. As she looked, she suddenly heard a tiger roar from behind her. This tiger roar didn't sound like it was made by a tiger. It sounded more like a human's, beast language. Mu Linger gave a start and didn't say a word. Whose medicine field is it? Jean Z asked coldly. It's hers. It's hers. The woman replied hastily. She didn't even wait for Jean Z to ask before she admitted it herself. I'm a slut, I'm a slut. Mu Linger looked at the woman, then slowly glanced back at Jean Z, who was looking back at her. When their eyes met, Mu Linger subconsciously looked away. For some reason, she felt wronged and angry, but now, she suddenly wanted to laugh. It wasn't because she wanted to vent her anger. She couldn't explain why. In any case, she was no longer angry at the woman and didn't want to be calculative. Jean Z asked coldly, what happened to the wound on your face? Only then did Mu Linger remember the scratch marks on her face. It still hurt when she touched them lightly. She said, this woman scratched me. Take her back. Jean Z's tone was practically an order. He wouldn't allow Mu Linger to suffer any losses. Mu Linger looked up and said, forget it, no. Jean Z interrupted her unhappily. Mu Linger said softly, I'm fine. I won't be calculative with someone like her. Jean Z's face darkened as he said this. He hated this kind and magnanimous character the most. But unexpectedly, Mu Linger continued, ask her to apologize to Big White and ask Big White to catch her for me. I don't want to get physical with her. Hearing this, the woman was so angry that she forgot about the pain on her back. She was about to explode. She originally thought that Mu Linger would be more magnanimous. Who knew that Mu Linger would join Jean Z in humiliating her? They were clearly saying that she was only fit to be touched by beasts. Jean Z's frozen face finally cracked. He couldn't help but smile dotingly. Unfortunately, it disappeared quickly and Mu Linger didn't see it either. Coldly, he said, all right. He looked at Big White. Seeing Big White covered in blood, how could he not feel pained? He waved his hand and Big White ran over. He hadn't even opened his mouth when Big White attacked first. He swatted at the woman with his large paw and threw her into the distance. Beasts didn't care about her apology. In the world of beasts, how could there be such a thing as an apology? Attacking was the most straightforward way. Jinzi and Mu Ling chased after her. Big White immediately followed after them. They saw the woman vomiting blood and fainting. Big White was about to attack again when Mu Ling hurriedly stopped him. That's enough. If you kill her, your master won't know where she came from. Chapter 1293. Not to mention a heavily injured person, even a normal person would die if they were to lie in the snow for 2 hours. Mu Ling personally took action and dragged the woman into the stone house. Jinzi pulled her up and frowned as he looked at the wound on her face. Go and apply medicine. Pull her back first, otherwise she will die. Mu Ling said seriously. She deserves to die. Jinzi said. You really don't want to know about your background? Mu Ling asked angrily. She did not know what she was angry about. She could not even speak 3 sentences with this fellow and she would always get angry. I don't need you to care about my matters. Go and apply medicine. Jinzi pulled her into the house, but Mu Ling fiercely flung his hand away. I also don't need you to worry about my matters. You. Jinzi's anger was stuck in his chest and he felt extremely uncomfortable. He scolded loudly, Mu Ling, how stupid are you? Did your parents give you a brain? Do you know how dangerous this place is? Who allowed you to come here? It was fine if he scolded her, but he even dragged her parents into it. Mu Ling was also angry. Jinzi, I will say it for the last time. I don't need you to worry about my matters. Don't you understand human language? You go now, immediately, quickly bring that woman into the house. If she dies, you won't even have time to cry. Whether she dies or not, what does it have to do with me? Jinzi was mad with anger. He risked his life and cleaved a path through the thick snow. He risked his life and braved the wind and snow. His clothes were wet and dry several times, but he didn't dare to stop to change. He just wanted to find her as soon as possible. How could she not be grateful to him? Didn't she love to cry? After suffering such a big grievance, if she did not accept it, shouldn't she throw herself into his arms and cry? She actually dared to quarrel with him so confidently. What kind of woman was this? Mu Ling was also angry. How hard was it to communicate with Jinzi? How many times do you want me to say it before you understand? Do you really not understand human language? If she's dead, you won't be able to find out who you really are. Haven't you been investigating your background? Mu Ling asked angrily. Why are you worried that I won't be able to find out my background? Goldie asked angrily. That's what I'm worried about. Mu Ling said fiercely. As soon as he said that, the two of them suddenly quieted down. They looked at each other at the same time, but they immediately looked away. Soon, Mu Ling explained anxiously, I was worried that you wouldn't be able to find out the truth and would blame me for it. I don't want to be the scapegoat. Thank you for reminding me. After Jinzi finished speaking, he strode over and carried the unconscious woman in his arms. Mu Ling looked at it and slowly frowned. She didn't even notice it. Jinzi placed the woman on the only stone couch in the stone house. Mu Ling entered the house and asked, What about Big White's injury? Its blood is poisonous. If you touch it, it will heal on its own, Jinzi said coldly. Mu Ling returned and stood by the bed. Jinzi couldn't take it anymore. Aren't you going to apply the medicine? If your face is ruined, you can forget about getting married for the rest of your life. Mu Ling'er didn't answer him, but she still went to apply the medicine obediently. Fortunately, the scratch marks weren't too deep and could still heal. After applying the medicine, Mu Ling'er sat down at the side and said mildly, "Why are you here?" "Why, you don't want me to come?" Jin Zi asked. Mu Ling'er was silent for a moment before saying softly, "Thank you." If he hadn't come, she didn't know what would have happened. She didn't know if she would have survived. She didn't know if Jin Zi would accept her gratitude. He was silent for a long time. The two of them just sat there, the woman still unconscious. When the sky was completely dark, Mu Ling'er stood up and said mildly, "I'm going to cook." Mu Ling'er. Jin Zi called out to her. "Who do you want to come?" It was so dangerous and she was bullied to tears. If she didn't want him to come, who did she want to come? "Who do you want to come?" Jin Zi murmured. Mu Ling'er didn't turn around, but she stopped in her tracks. Who did she want to come? If Jin Zi hadn't asked, she wouldn't have thought of this question. Yes, she was bullied to tears. Who did she want to come and save her? If it was in the past, the first person she thought of would be Chi brother. It must be. But this time, her mind was empty. She didn't think of anyone. She didn't have any hope or expectation. Would it mean that one had grown up when they no longer wished, longed, or imagined the impossible? She knew very well that Chi brother wouldn't come. It was impossible. No one. Mu Ling'er was very honest. "I just want my martial arts to be better." Mu Ling'er was about to leave when Jin Zi asked, "Mu Ling'er, can I ask you a question?" Mu Ling'er didn't say anything and didn't walk forward. Jin Zi walked towards her step by step and stood behind her. Mu Ling'er waited for a moment, but he didn't continue. She was about to ask when Jin Zi suddenly hugged her from behind and pulled her into his arms tightly. He said, "Mu Ling'er, since you don't have any hope in your heart, then this time I'm here. Can you want me to come next time?" Jin Zi clearly felt the person in his arms stiffen. He buried his head in her shoulder and closed his eyes, waiting for an answer. Or rather, waiting for a trial. He knew that it was impossible, but he couldn't help but ask. He knew that he couldn't love her, but he couldn't help but say that he loved her. He knew that he could force her, but he couldn't bear to force her. He just wanted to ask. Mu Ling'er had already closed her eyes. "Linggu, you like that brat, right?" Jin Zi still didn't answer. "Okay, if you like that brat, pretend that you didn't meet me. I'll go back by myself. I'll pretend that you're dead and never look for you again." After saying that, she really turned to leave. Jin Zi cold looked at her and was about to speak when Mu Ling'er suddenly opened the door and said loudly, "Stop. He doesn't like me, and I don't like him. We're just friends. He will go with you." Jin Zi suddenly frowned and asked cold, "What right do you have to make the decision for me?" For the first time, Mu Ling'er looked into Jin Zi's angry eyes so bravely. She wasn't stupid enough to completely believe Feng Ying's words, but this was an opportunity. An opportunity to go to the mysterious continent to find her hometown and family. She believed that with Jin Zi's intelligence, he wouldn't be fooled by Feng Ying and could use Feng Ying to find out about her background. Jin Zi was a man who did things his own way and did as he pleased. He could not be restrained in Northern Li or in the officialdom. He could not stay for her sake. He should return to the place where he truly belonged. Her heart was too small, too weak. She had loved once. She didn't dare and wouldn't love again, Mu Ling said seriously, Jin Z, leave. Northernly isn't suitable for you. Such a simple sentence was enough to shatter Goldie's heart. If he wanted to leave, he would have left long ago. He wouldn't have worked so hard in Northernly for 2 years. Northernly wasn't suitable for him. So she knew. Jin Z sneered, Mu Ling, before I leave, shouldn't you settle the score? Score. In Tiger's prison, you owed me a night. In the cave, you owed me a lifetime. A year has passed. Mu Ling, I'm sorry to tell you that I'll add all the interest. Don't even think about leaving my side for the rest of your life. Jin Z suddenly forced himself in front of Mu Ling, and said word by word, you, come with me. He was finally ruthless. After going around in circles and hiding for 2 years, they were still back to square one. It was like a knot that couldn't be untied. No matter how the string was twisted, it would never be untied. Mu Ling, only felt weak all over and her mind was in a mess. Actually, she had always remembered what happened in Tiger's prison and the cave. She had also been prepared to repay the debt. But at this moment, she was still caught unprepared. Feng followed closely behind, and when she saw Jin Z hugging Mu Ling, tightly and not letting go, she couldn't help but feel jealous. Originally, she only wanted that man for the power of the Black Forest, but now, she realized that she wanted him from the bottom of her heart and also couldn't tolerate Mu Ling, this wretched lass, from the bottom of her heart. Mu Ling, closed her eyes and curled up into a ball in Jin Z's arms. She had yet to recover from her shock, and Jin Z hugged her tightly, not regaining his senses from the warmth. They sat there quietly, claiming to be in a quiet world. However, Feng quickly broke this beautiful silence. Let's go quickly, or we'll freeze to death if we don't have a place to stay tonight. She urged and added, you'd better not bring those tigers along or no herdsman will take you in. Jin Z still ignored her, but Mu Ling, slowly opened her eyes and realized that she had landed safely on flat ground. She heaved a sigh of relief and quickly realized that she was in Jin Z's tight embrace. She seemed to want to say something but swallowed the words that were about to come out of her mouth. Was it useful for her to say anything more? The more she spoke, the more noisy she would be. She also ignored Feng, who was standing at the side, and continued to lower her head, remaining silent like a mute. Did you hear that? Let's go quickly. Feng was burning with anger and was about to push Mu Ling, away when she was stunned by Jin Z's deep gaze. Jin Z let go of Mu Ling, but didn't forget to pull her up. Feng threw him an aggrieved and dissatisfied look, but Jin Z pretended not to see it. He dismissed all the tigers and said coldly, lead the way. The 3 of them spent 2 hours and finally saw signs of human habitation when it was late at night. The herdsmen were warm and hospitable, but unfortunately, they didn't have any extra space and could only let Jin Z stay in a small tent to store firewood. The old woman took out the best sheepskin in the house and laid it on the haystack. Then, she took out a quilt and carefully laid it out. She chuckled and said, young master, it's very warm like this. Don't worry. These 2 girls will sleep in my daughter's room. Tomorrow morning, Auntie will make pancakes for you to eat. Feng was overjoyed and knew that her chance had come. However, Jin Z hugged Mu Ling, and said, she'll sleep here with me. The old woman glanced at Mu Ling, suspiciously. Seeing that Jin Z's expression wasn't good, she didn't dare to ask more and just nodded and left. Once the old woman left, Feng was furious. You guys. Ling-gu, how can you be like this? I'm your fiancé after all. We'll leave at sunrise tomorrow. You can go out now. Jean Z interrupted cold. What do you take me for? If you're like this, I won't take you back. I'll leave by myself. Feng Ying ran out in a huff. She thought that Jean Z would chase after her, but who knew that Jean Z would only give her the sound of the door slamming shut. No matter how many lies, schemes, they were all useless in front of someone who couldn't be bothered to pay attention to you. At least, in front of Jean Z's indifference, they wouldn't be able to do anything. The sound of the door slamming shut shattered Feng Ying's evil plan and also woke Mu Ling up. She slowly turned back to look at the tightly shut wooden door. Her originally stiff body became even stiffer and she couldn't help but tremble. What was Jean Z trying to do? Chapter 1297. When Mu Ling saw this scene, she did not turn around and run away. She regained her senses and suddenly rushed in front of Jean Z and Feng Ying. She did not know where she got the strength from, but she pushed Jean Z away and gave Feng Ying a fierce slap. Feng Ying did not expect this and had not recovered from the slap. Jean Z was weak all over and could not get up after being pushed to the side. He looked at Mu Ling, whose face was covered in tears. He wanted to explain but did not know how to. He had no idea what had happened. His memory stopped at hugging Mu Ling and falling asleep. He really could not remember what happened after that. Mu Ling glared at Jean Z angrily before turning around and running out. Mu Ling Jean Z panicked. At this time, Feng Ying regained her senses and muttered, "She hit me. She dared to hit me." Jean Z coldly looked at Feng Ying. Although his body was weak, his eyes revealed a terrifying killing intent. The anger emitted from his body grew stronger and stronger. Seeing this, Feng Ying could not help but retreat in fear. I heard that you were sick, so I came over to take a look. Feng Ying hurriedly quibbled, "Who knew that you would? Linggu, you bullied me. Why are you still so fierce?" Jean Z defended her and did not even need to ask the truth. He said coldly, "I'm going to kill you." Linggu, Feng Ying subconsciously retreated. Even though she knew that Jean Z did not have the strength to truss a chicken, even though she knew that she could control this man at any time, she was still afraid. She was so afraid that she forgot to make a move and only knew to retreat and hide. His eyes were too terrifying. Very quickly, Feng Ying sensed a group of beasts approaching. She had been with beasts since she was young and understood that kind of aura too well. The outside of the tent must have been surrounded by beasts. They were all filled with killing intent. Because the man in front of her really wanted to kill her. Feng Ying's back hit the pile of firewood and she had no way to retreat. She finally revealed her true colors, "Let me go and I'll tell you everything." Jean Z was indifferent. Although he did not move, the cold killing intent in his eyes pressed towards Feng Ying, as if he could kill her at any time. The more silent Jean Z was, the more terrified Feng Ying was. "I'll tell you everything about the Ling family, the whole truth, and you'll let me go." Jean Z was definitely not interested in what she had to say. Coldly, he stared at her and growled like a beast. This was the sound of calling for a beast. Feng Ying's entire body trembled. She suddenly rolled to the side and grabbed a dagger. Since he couldn't have her and wanted her to die, then he might as well die. She pulled out her dagger and stabbed at Jean Z. However, before she could stab the gold, she was pushed to the ground by the big white tiger that rushed in. Just the lines of his arms were perfect as if they were carved. His shoulders were not as weak as they usually looked. They were not broad, but they were broad and refined. They were sexy and full of strength. Could it be related to his clothes? The more Mu Ling looked, the more amazed she was. The more she looked, the more she could not help but look down. She could see his perfect chest and abdominal muscles. They were so well defined that they looked like a sculpture. She couldn't stop her gaze from moving down his abdominal muscles. The lines became more refined as she moved down, and they were even more breathtaking. She blushed and blushed. It was not until her line of sight was blocked by the blanket that Mu Ling suddenly regained her senses. The medicine in her hand almost fell to the ground again. Are all men's bodies so beautiful? This question surfaced in Mu Ling's mind. She hurriedly shook her head and ignored this thought. She put the medicine aside and hurriedly pulled the blanket over Jean Z tightly. Jean Z's eyes were tightly shut. He was immersed in despair and was indifferent to the movements around him. It was only when Mu Ling touched his hand that he was shocked and recognized her hand immediately. He opened his eyes abruptly. Sure enough, he saw the face that he had missed for more than 2 years. Her face was full of tears and she looked like a pitiful person. He was obviously in despair, but at this moment he smiled. He gently wiped away the tears at the corner of her eyes and said gently, Mu Ling, I dreamed of you again. He thought that he would never see her again, not even dream of her. Mu Ling was stunned. She hurriedly avoided his gentle gaze and his hand. She touched his forehead. Although she had expected it, she was still shocked by the temperature. He was already sick, and after the torment just now, his condition had worsened. She hurriedly took his pulse. Sure enough, his condition had worsened. The medicine would definitely worsen his condition, but his condition was too urgent. If she hesitated any longer or came any later, his brain would have been burned out. She did not have time to brew the medicine again. She had to let Jean Z drink this bowl of medicine first to slow down his condition. Get up and drink the medicine. Hurry. This is not a dream. Mu Ling said seriously. She used all her strength to pull Jean Z up to sit. Unfortunately, she could not move him at all. This guy looked so thin, but she could not tell how heavy he was. She had already personally tested it. If Jean Z had the strength to move, he would have gone out to look for her. He did not even have the strength to turn over. Be good. Sit down quietly and let me take a good look. Jean Z still thought that he was immersed in a dream. In the past 2 years, he had dreamed of her too often. He would dream of her every few days. Chapter 1298. Faced with Jean Z's question, Mu Ling turned around and said something that Jean Z would never forget for the rest of his life. She said, Jean Z, you were almost raped by that woman. I thought about it. You saved me after all. I can't let you be defiled by others. Jean Z was dumbfounded and could not speak for a long time. Mu Ling was not stupid. She had taken Jean Z's pulse and knew very well how sick he was. Moreover, she had only left for a short while. Jean Z could not have seduced that woman. It was obvious that the woman had thrown herself at him. She ran out of the door and stood there for a while before she figured out what had happened. She wanted to go back, but when she saw the tigers approaching, she knew that Jean Z would be fine. Thus, she hurried to brew the medicine again. To the seriously ill Jean Z, medicine was the most important thing. When she came out with the medicine, she saw a pool of blood and a human skeleton in the snow. She had always been timid, but when she saw that scene, she was not afraid at all. She did not feel that it was cruel. Instead, she felt an indescribable sense of satisfaction. She felt that she had become bad. Jinzi had a lot to say, but he did not know what to say in the face of Mu Ling's answer. He only felt humiliated, angry, and helpless. In the end, all the words he wanted to say were reduced to 2 words, "Come here." Mu Ling did not move. She asked, "How are you going to go to the mysterious continent after killing that woman? How are you going to find your hometown?" "Come here and I'll tell you," Jinzi said calmly. Mu Ling did not go over. Instead, she grabbed the medicine bag on the ground and ran out without a word. She did not run far. She stood at the door and raised her head to let the cold wind hit her face to wake her up. Her lips were still swollen and painful. His breath lingered on them. She touched her lips gently, her heart beating faster. Her heart was even more chaotic than before. She really did not know what to do with him. She was getting more and more clueless. She did not even realize that she had unknowingly lost her previous decisiveness. She did not go anywhere. She only went to brew a new batch of medicine. She boiled the medicine and sent it to the tent, only to find that Jinzi was asleep. She carefully touched his forehead, checked his temperature, and then took his pulse. After making sure that his condition was better, her hanging heart finally relaxed. She nudged him. "Hey, get up and take your medicine." She thought that it would take a long time for him to wake up. However, when she pushed him, he opened his eyes. He was pretending to be asleep again. She frowned as she looked at him. Her tear-stained face made her look like an old woman. This time, he didn't pretend. He struggled to sit up, took the medicine from her, and drank it in big gulps. After drinking all the medicine, he said, "You're here again. I thought you wouldn't come back again." He hadn't even asked her why she had come back. She gave her answer first. "Since I've saved him to the end. So, we're even now, right?" "No." He smiled weakly. "You were the one who begged me to help you. Today, I didn't force you to save me. The 2 of us cannot be reconciled." Actually, she was just saying it casually. She knew very well that he was so smart that he wouldn't agree to it. The 2 of them remained silent. The sky was still dark, and this was the coldest time. There was no heater in the tent. Mu Ling sat for a while, and her hands and feet started to feel cold. She unconsciously rubbed her hands together. "I'll lend it to you." Jinzi grabbed his fur robe and threw it to her. Mu Ling did not reject it and wrapped herself tightly in the fur robe. The 2 of them fell silent again. They sat like this and waited for dawn. Some people said that the darkness before dawn was always unusually long. Mu Ling realized that this saying was true. She waited and waited, but time passed very slowly. The sky in the grassland was still dark. She was already wrapped in a fox fur robe, but why was it still so cold? The cold air kept rising from her feet, and she was so cold that she shivered. Finally, Jinzi broke the silence. Coldly, he said, "Mu Ling, I'm giving you one last chance. If you come over, I'll consider this night as repayment to me. Otherwise, I'll really charge you interest." Mu Ling looked up, her gaze guarded. Jinzi sneered, "If you follow from the cold, who's going to brew medicine for me? You know that I can't do anything now." Mu Ling's mood was originally very heavy, but after hearing his words, she couldn't help but burst into laughter. He didn't have much strength, so he really couldn't bully her. Despite laughing, Mu Ling still didn't move. She asked pitifully, "Then will you still marry me?" This woman was insatiable and wanted a yard after getting an inch. Jean Z had said so many times that he would marry her, but when had he ever been serious? He was afraid that he had completely lost to her. He said, no. Mu Ling still didn't go over. She stuck out her pinky. Pinky promise, lie. If you lie, you'll lose every bet. Jean Z very straightforwardly made a pinky promise with her and swore a deadly oath. Mu Ling finally felt at ease. She took off her outer robe and obediently crawled over, sneaking into the warm blanket. This night, she had already planned for the worst, but she didn't expect it to turn out like this. As long as she waited until daybreak, she and Jean Z would be even. Mu Ling lay on her side, allowing Jean Z to slowly approach her from behind. However, when Jean Z came over and hugged her, her heart instantly skipped a beat. She then remembered that Jean Z wasn't wearing any clothes. Jean Z covered her mouth with one hand, while the other held her waist tightly. I'm willing to repay your debt for the rest of my life. His name was Goldie. Even his betrothal gift was so tacky. However, Mu Linger was so touched that she wanted to cry. Were the two of them destined to never be able to repay each other's debt in this lifetime? Mu Linger accepted the gold card. I'll marry you. After the snow melted, Goldie and Mu Linger went down the mountain and returned to the northerly barracks. Goldie prepared a grand wedding for Mu Linger. Tang Li kept his promise and gave a generous dowry for Mu Linger. Han Yunxi also prepared a dowry for Mu Linger as a princess. Goldie personally wrote the invitation and did not leave out Gu's copy. The invitation was sent to the Medicine Ghost Valley. It was not known if the people from the Medicine Ghost Valley had sent the invitation to Gu. In short, everyone was present at the wedding 1 month later except for Gu. No one knew how Mu Linger was related to Goldie and no one dared to mention Gu. But Goldie took the initiative to ask Long Fei Yi, Your Majesty, why is Prince Yu not here? Long Fei Yi replied, other than his own wedding, he will not attend other people's wedding. When these words came out, Tang Li could not help but laugh, isn't that so? He also did not appear at Grand Tutor Gu's wedding. Mu Linger suddenly turned around and looked over. This time, everyone was quiet. Goldie did not evade, it is not that I did not invite him but he did not give me face. Everyone was shocked but Mu Linger said, Chi brother is a stingy person. He gave a gift to Grand Tutor Gu but did not give me one. This time, everyone was even more shocked. Everyone avoided Gu Qishao's name, but these two didn't mind at all. What was going on between them? At this time, Su Donglin flew in with a long brocade box in his hand. Goldie Darren, His Highness Prince Yu sent someone to send you a congratulatory gift. Seeing that brocade box, Han Yunxi, Mu Linger, Gu Beiyue and Qin Min all had a complicated expression. This brocade box was so familiar. My mother has the final say in our family. Rui was more than 2 years old. He looked more and more like Long Fei Yi. His eyes were lively, and there was an innate air of nobility between his brows. He didn't say anything. He patted his hands and knees seriously and stood up. His expression and actions were just like a little adult. He was clearly a year younger than Tang Tang, but he was more mature than Tang Tang. He was like Tang Tang's older brother. However, as soon as he stood up, he saw Jean Z and Mu Linger kissing. In an instant, all of his mature facade was shattered, and a perplexed expression appeared on his immature face. He was very curious and muttered, "What are they doing?" When Tang Tang saw this, she immediately screamed and hurriedly covered her brother's eyes. "Shame! Don't look." Only then did the adults remember the two children playing at the side. Han Yunxi and Tang Li couldn't help but laugh. Long Fei Yi immediately carried Rue and strode away. Ning Jing covered Tang Tang's eyes and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "You already know how to be shy. What are you still looking at?" "Yes," Tang Tang covered her brother's eyes while she stared at the two shy adults. Everyone went out. Lil Thing suddenly fell from the beam. It couldn't stop laughing and rolling on the ground. Another embarrassing incident for the little master. Every time it saw little master embarrass himself, it was like seeing Long Dada embarrass himself when he was young. It was simply too happy. With little master's temperament now, his temper would definitely be similar to Long Dada's in the future. When that time came, if someone could tell little master these embarrassing incidents when he was young, how would little master react? Lil Thing looked back and saw that Miss Ling and Jean Z were kissing too intensely. It couldn't help but shudder and hurriedly ran out. It immediately jumped onto young master's shoulder. It inadvertently glanced at Qin Min beside young master, but there was no hostility. It didn't know the relationship between young master and Qin Min. It only knew that young master wasn't with Qin Min on the day of his wedding. Young master and Qin Min had been acting all along. On the way from Yuning to the northernly military camp, young master and Qin Min were in the same carriage, but the distance between them was very far. Their words and actions were very polite and improper. No matter how tired young master was, he didn't lie down in the carriage during the journey. Qin Min was the same. She always leaned on the bed and dozed off. Even if there was a high pillow beside her, she didn't casually lean on it. Lil Thing jumped a few times on young master's shoulder and jumped onto Qin Min's shoulder. Qin Min tilted her head and gently scratched Lil Thing's chin. Lil Thing enjoyed it and intimately rubbed against her hand. Lil Thing liked Qin Min very much because she was so obedient. Jean Z's subordinates arranged a new tent for Long Fei Yi and the others to continue the banquet. Normally, Jean Z, the bridegroom, should come out to entertain everyone. Moreover, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi, the two masters, were still at the banquet, so Jean Z couldn't leave. However, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi didn't say anything, so the people below didn't dare to care about the rules. As for those who wanted to disturb the bridal chamber, they didn't dare to take the initiative to make trouble when they saw that Jean Z stood the emperor and empress up and didn't come to serve them personally. At night, the wedding banquet was still lively. Mu Ling and Jean Z had already been sent to the bridal chamber by the matron of honor. The couple sat on the bed and continued the ceremony according to the matron of honor's instructions. The matron of honor was found by Jean Z, and this wedding ceremony was requested by Jean Z. He was a prodigal son without a family, but he couldn't wrong Mu Ling in terms of etiquette for such a big event as a wedding. He wouldn't leave her out of anything that others should have. The wedding ceremony lifted the red veil, ate the sweet soup, and drank the cross-cupped wine. The matron of honor smiled and whispered a few words to Jean Z before leaving. Jean Z personally went to send them off and locked the door. Mu Ling's shy face was covered with a faint blush. Under the festive red light in the room, she looked especially dainty. But the most beautiful moment was when she raised her eyes to look at Jean Z, and that moment of shyness. Just now, she was almost suffocated by this man's kiss. Fortunately, the matron of honor interrupted them and sent them to the bridal chamber. Jean Z walked over, squatted down in front of her, and held her hands. Both of them were silent. It seemed that they were used to arguing with each other and were not used to such a sudden silence. After a long while, Jinzi said, "I won't compromise. I'm serious." Of course, Mu-Ling knew what he was talking about. She said, "I'm sorry to have made you wait so long." "Fortunately, it's less than 3 years," he said lightly. "Are you really not going to the mysterious continent?" She wanted to ask this for a long time. "No. It's fine. It's quite good now," he answered. "Why?" She didn't understand. "You're too stupid. You're not suitable there." He meant what he said. From Feng Ying's words, his background was definitely not simple. He could control the tiger tribe, but Feng Ying could. The people of the black tribe couldn't control them either. There must be a reason behind this. Since he was young, he had seen how constrained and helpless Ning Qing was when he shouldered the mission. He didn't like it, and Mu-Ling wasn't suitable there either. It was quite good now. Moreover, he couldn't really lose Northernly after marrying Mu-Ling. Wouldn't Ning Qing hate him for the rest of his life? "You're stupider than me, okay?" Mu-Ling said unhappily. Jinzi raised his eyebrows and looked at her with disdain. Mu-Ling saw his gaze and frowned. "You're bullying me right after marrying me. If I'd known earlier, I wouldn't have married you for the rest of my life." Jinzi coughed lightly and said, "Mu-Ling, I don't think I've done anything to you yet, right? Are you regretting it already? What else do you want to do to me?" Mu-Ling was angry. It was one thing for this guy to call her stupid for no reason, but what else did he want? What did his not going to Mysterious Sky have to do with her being stupid? At most, he knew how to tame beasts. In terms of martial arts, they were all considered mediocre. Jinzi stood up. Mu-Ling wanted to stand up as well, but before she could stand firm, she was pushed onto the couch by Jinzi. He pressed down on her and propped his hands on either side of her. He looked down at her and said very honestly, "Mu-Ling, I've tolerated you for a very, very long time." Mu-Ling originally thought that Jinzi was going to bully her, but when Jinzi said that, she was confused. What did he tolerate? "Hey, I haven't provoked you recently, right? What did you tolerate? Say it out loud," she asked angrily. Jinzi was instantly speechless. Mu-Ling grabbed his collar and said, "Speak clearly." Jinzi really didn't want to say those words, but he had to. He said word by word, "Mu-Ling, how stupid are you? Ridiculous." Mu-Ling really didn't understand. Jinzi looked at her confused little face and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. In the end, he could only control his temper and lean down to whisper in her ear. What did he tolerate? After tasting meat, he couldn't eat the beauty in his arms every night. If he wasn't tolerating her, then what was he doing? Mu-Ling was enlightened, and the redness in her ears spread to her entire face. Meanwhile, Jinzi was already nibbling on her ear and kissing it. Unlike that night in the grasslands, Jinzi was especially gentle tonight. Tonight, Mu-Ling was especially awake. She carefully felt his touch and personally experienced all the questions that she had been curious about. So this was what it felt like. When Jinzi's big hand gently reached in and covered her sensitivity and softness with incomparable gentleness, she finally couldn't feel it clearly anymore. She couldn't help but cry out, unable to bear it. If that night in the grasslands was painful, uncomfortable, painful, numb, and scared, then at this moment, she was only greedy. She was greedy for every touch and every kiss he gave her. It must be because of love that she could be so unrestrained and so beautiful. Only when he truly became one with her would he feel so close to her. Only then would he feel that he truly possessed her. Jean Z, from now on, Ling is yours. You have to be happy. Did Jean Z teach you that? Ning Jing asked jokingly. She didn't know if it was because Mu Ling was already a married woman or something else, but Ning Jing felt that this girl looked different, but she couldn't tell what was different. Han Yunxi came over and was immediately attracted by the aroma of the barbecue meat. She was so hungry that she couldn't look away. Thinking back, she only found out that she was pregnant when she was disgusted by the barbecue meat. Now, looking at the barbecue meat, she didn't feel disgusted at all. Instead, her appetite was very good. As soon as she walked in, Gu Beiyue said from the side, "Your Highness the Empress, you can't." Han Yunxi glanced over and didn't have a chance to refute. Long Fei Yi had already grabbed her hand and said in a low voice, "Rest in the tent. You've been on the carriage for half a day. Su Donglin will send your lunch over later. Be good and listen to him. If you let Su Donglin give you special treatment again, I'll definitely chop off his hands." Although Long Fei spoke in a low voice, everyone still heard him. They all looked towards Han Yunxi, including Jean Z, who'd been bowing his head the entire time. Han Yunxi wanted to find a hole to hide in. Ever since she was diagnosed with the pregnancy pulse and was sent back to Yuning, she had been living a non-human life. Long Fei Yi asked for a small booklet from Tang Li. It recorded all kinds of taboos and supplements. Long Fei Yi strictly followed all the rules in the booklet. Whether it was in the palace or out of the palace, there were no exceptions to her 3 meals. He said he would make it up to her, he said he would accompany her. Why did it turn out like this? However, she had to admit that this pregnancy was far less relaxed and flexible than the last time. She didn't know if it was because she was old or if she had eaten and slept too much that she had become stupid. She was only about 5 months pregnant, but her belly was very obvious and very big. When she walked, she would unconsciously use her hand to support her waist. "Sister, I'll go in with you." Ling quickly came over to support her. However, Jean Z suddenly asked, "Grand Tutor Gu, other than barbecued food, what else can't you eat when you're pregnant?" Mu Ling was shocked and instinctively looked at her flat belly. Although she didn't eat much barbecued food, she liked other things, such as fried, braised, or barbecued food. She especially liked spicy food. When she was making medicine, if she didn't eat until she was full, she wouldn't be able to concentrate. Gu Beiyue said indifferently, fried, braised, and barbecued food. It's best to have a light taste, less sour and less spicy. Jean Z nodded and didn't say anything. However, Mu Ling felt uncomfortable all over. After Jean Z tormented her last night, she even told him that she hoped that the baby would come quickly. Now, it seemed that she had to seriously consider it. When Ning Jing saw Mu Ling's expression and recalled what she said in Tiger's prison, she couldn't help but want to laugh. She also went over to support Han Yunxi. They were about to enter when Han Yunxi turned around and looked. "Qin Min, come over and rest. Don't just stand there." After Qin Min dismounted, she stood beside Gu Beiyue and was especially quiet. "Yes, Your Majesty." She curtsied. Her polite manner was exactly the same as Gu Beiyue's. On the way from Yuning to Bailey, Han Yunxi spoke a few times, but in the end, she was too lazy to continue. The women had all entered the tent to chat, so it wasn't appropriate for Long Fei and the rest of the men to enter. Tang Li moved to Jean Z's side and learned how to barbecue meat from him. Long Fei Yi and Gu Beiyue sat at the side, watching and whispering. As for Rue and Tang Tang, they had already chased the little thing far away. As Long Fei Yi and Gu Beiyue chatted, they looked up at the snowy mountains in the west and asked indifferently, Lord Jean, how about we flatten Wintercrow's slave camp next year? In Wintercrow, from the nobles to the slave traders, there were slave camps that imprisoned countless slaves. The prison of the slave camp was the beginning of Jean Zi's memories in this life. Jean Zi's hand stiffened slightly, but he quickly continued to flip the meat. He said, How many men will your majesty give this humble subject? How many do you want? Long Fei Yi asked. Jean Zi finally looked up and said seriously, I'll report after I think it through. In the tent, Han Yunxi, Mu Ling, and Ning Jing were all sitting lazily. Only Qin Min sat upright, her back straight like a well-bred young lady. Han Yunxi and Mu Ling had just finished telling Ning Jing about Qin Min's legs being poisoned. As for Qin Min's miscarriage, Han Yunxi and Long Fei Yi still pretended not to know anything. Now, everyone thought that Qin Min had lost her child and was recuperating. They also knew that she and Gu Beiyue had adopted a foster son in Ningzhou City, whose nickname was Shadow. Han Yunxi originally thought that Qin Min would become familiar with everyone after sitting for a while, but who knew that Qin Min would sit quietly without saying a word. The three of them chatted and laughed. Qin Min would laugh with them, but she didn't interrupt. Finally, Han Yunxi couldn't help but raise her brows and look at Qin Min. Mu Ling wanted to speak, but Ning Jing stopped her with a look. Han Yunxi looked at Qin Min with interest. Qin Min didn't panic, but she was a little uncomfortable. She asked, Your Majesty the Empress, is there something on my face? Han Yunxi shook her head and didn't say anything. Qin Min was suspicious. Your Majesty the Empress has something to say to me. Han Yunxi shook her head again. Qin Min couldn't help but laugh and asked directly, Then why is Your Majesty the Empress looking at me?